The day the Earth went silent, no one was prepared for the enormity of the event. It was not heralded by a warning, nor was it accompanied by any sign of natural disaster. It was sudden, it was absolute, and it was terrifying. It began at precisely 3 o'clock a.m. UTC. 1 minute, the world was as it had always been, cities teeming with life, bustling highways filled with the hum of cars, air traffic weaving across the sky, and communications lines alive with exchanges between politicians, business leaders, and ordinary citizens alike. Then, without warning, all that noisy, every whisper, every broadcast, every signal simply vanished. The first indication that something was wrong came in the form of a news anchor's frozen face on a major network. Her mouth moved as though speaking, but no sound emanated from the television screens across the world. The symbol for connection lost flashed on the bottom of every screen. Moments later, the same phenomenon occurred on every platform, from social media to long-distance phone calls, from satellite links to radio transmissions. Static filled the airwaves where there had once been voices. And then, nothing. People who had been listening to music on their devices found their playlists interrupted. Cars that relied on GPS navigation systems faltered, leaving their drivers stranded in confusion. News outlets tried to make sense of it, but they couldn't explain the silence. It wasn't a technical failure, it wasn't a hacking attack, no one could determine what was wrong, but the unmistakable fact remained: Earth had gone silent. At first, there were theories, wild ideas that swirled in the minds of people from all corners of the Earth. Perhaps an unprecedented solar flare had knocked out all communications. Maybe it was some kind of highly coordinated global hack. Some claimed it was the work of extraterrestrials, as absurd as that sounded to some. The usual suspects of the governments, the media, the tech experts scrambled to provide explanations, but no one could make sense of it. What followed was panic. In the following hours, the world's governments issued public statements acknowledging the silence, but none could offer more than speculation. No one had any answers. And it didn't take long before paranoia set in. Social media exploded with theories ranging from the scientific to the bizarre. Aliens, secret government experiments gone wrong, a global blackout caused by an artificial intelligence uprising. Some even said it was the end of the world itself. By dawn, millions of people flooded into the streets, desperately seeking information. The quiet was oppressive, stifling, as though the planet itself had ceased to breathe. And still, no one knew why. An inescapable truth. It wasn't until the second day that the scientists began to speak out. Dr. Emily Stratton, a leading astrophysicist at the prestigious Galvan Institute of Space Research, was one of the first to acknowledge the unthinkable. Earth's silence was not due to a natural event. There were no solar flares, no rogue asteroids, no cosmic anomalies. Everything in space was as it had always been. Earth's silence wasn't a result of anything on Earth, it was a cosmic event. I've analyzed every data stream, Dr. Stratton explained in a hurried press conference. There is no interference, no radiation anomalies. The satellites are still functioning, but they can't transmit. It's as though a force, a broken barrier, has been put up around Earth itself. We're still observing the stars, but our signals cannot reach beyond the planet. This declaration sparked even more questions. What kind of force could possibly isolate an entire planet from the galaxy? What could silence Earth, cut off all communications, and yet leave no trace of an external cause? As hours turned into days, theories began to converge on something more ominous than simple technological failure or natural disaster. The scientists were growing increasingly nervous, too, as they continued their work in silence. Something more advanced, something far beyond the scope of human understanding, had caused this. At the same time, reports began to trickle in from space. Observatories around the world noted an eerie phenomenon. Every attempt to communicate with Earth's satellites or space stations failed. Telescopes, which had once allowed humanity to peer into the cosmos, now saw only empty space where Earth should have been. And the stars, normally so constant, had begun to shift in ways they couldn't explain. It wasn't just the Earth that had gone silent. It was as if the entire solar system had been affected, as though an invisible hand had placed a cosmic silence over the planet. Worse, There was no sign of it lifting. It didn't take long for the rest of the galaxy to take notice. News of the silent planet spread quickly, as though whispered by cosmic winds. The highly advanced civilizations that monitored Earth's progress, the beings that had been watching humanity's development for centuries, sensed something unusual. Earth, a planet of primitive creatures who had barely cracked the secrets of space, had become a black hole in communication. No signal, no data, not even a trace of life. For most species in the galaxy, this was unsettling. For some, it was terrifying. The Galactic Council takes action within days. Representatives from a dozen major galactic civilizations convened in an emergency session on the orbiting station known as the Nexus, a neutral ground where species of all kinds gathered to discuss issues of interstellar importance. The Nexus was a vast and elegant structure, a blend of organic and synthetic materials, floating in the center of a gas giant system. Here, members of the Galactic Council, leaders from species whose civilizations spanned entire star systems, met to address the crisis. Among them was General Carinth, a member of the Zithra species from the outer rim of the galaxy. The Zithra had once been ruthless conquerors, but over the centuries they had become an invaluable force in galactic peacekeeping. Their advanced military technology and cunning strategies made them one of the galaxy's most respected factions. "If there's one thing we can all agree on," General Carinth began, his slithering voice cutting through the chamber, "it is that Earth's sudden silence is not of their own making. There is no signal, no data. The silence is artificial." "Yes, but who or what could silence an entire planet?" asked Councillor Ziller, the representative of the Tlara nebula species, a being of pure energy. Ziller's form flickered and pulsed with electric light as he spoke, his voice like a chorus of static. "We have monitored Earth's development closely, and despite their chaotic nature, they have advanced far. Their curiosity is both their strength and their weakness. But nothing in the galaxy could account for a planetary-scale silencing." The room fell into a tense silence, each representative deep in thought. Earth had been one of the most promising species in the galaxy, an unpredictable force, yes, but one with untapped potential. "And now, this, we need to investigate," suggested Councillor Talamer, a quadrupedal species from the Epsilon Eridani system. "The longer this goes unanswered, the greater the risk it presents. If something has silenced Earth, then it could be a threat to the rest of us." But even as the council debated the implications of Earth's silence, another chilling reality emerged. Probes sent from neighboring planets, diplomatic messages, reconnaissance ships, and even exploratory drones had failed to penetrate the strange barrier surrounding Earth. It was as though Earth had been locked away in a cosmic prison, and no one could understand how or why. The discovery on Earth, the clock was ticking. For every day the planet remained silent, tensions among the species of the galaxy grew. Meanwhile, a small group of humans, isolated and unnoticed by the wider world, continued their work underground. Dr. Elisa Hammond was among them, a physicist specializing in quantum mechanics and astrophysics. She had been leading a highly classified project known only as the Pulse. The project had been her life's work, a device designed to communicate with extraterrestrial life, to send humanity's message into the stars and seek answers to questions that had plagued humankind for centuries. The Pulse was meant to be humanity's first formal attempt at interstellar diplomacy. But Dr. Hammond had never anticipated the consequences of her creation. The Pulse was never meant to open a gateway to something unknown, as something far more powerful than the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. Yet that's exactly what it had done. The Pulse was an invitation, Dr. Hammond said, her voice filled with a quiet terror as she sat in front of her team. "We didn't reach out to a species, a civilization. We reached something much older, something that was beyond us all." As she spoke, the full implications of their discovery began to sink in. They had unwittingly drawn the attention of an ancient force, an entity that existed far beyond the scope of their understanding. The silence was not an accident. It was a response. The entity had come, and it had demanded that Earth cease its exploration into the cosmos. To keep the silence intact was its command. And now, as Dr. Hammond looked out through the reinforced windows of their underground lab, she understood the terrifying truth. Earth's silence wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. Would you like to explore further chapters of this story or dive into another aspect of the plot? The strange silence. It was an hour past midnight when Dr. Elisa Hammond first felt the weight of the silence pressing down on her. The sterile hum of the lab was now a constant companion, the quieting of the world outside feeling more suffocating by the second. She had been sitting at her desk, staring at the chaotic mess of data streams across the large holographic display in front of her. Her fingers hovered above the controls, unsure of where to begin, unsure of what she even had to work with anymore. The pulse, she thought again, the pulse. It had all started with a simple, ambitious experiment. Earth's first genuine attempt to communicate with intelligent life beyond the stars, or so they had thought. Dr. Hammond and her team had devised the device, a sophisticated array of quantum entanglement technology, hoping to send out a message capable of breaching the fabric of space-time itself, a message that would transcend the limitations of traditional communication. They had believed it was a breakthrough, a leap into the next phase of human existence, a chance to finally make contact with another species, or at the very least, to learn if others existed beyond their star system. But something had gone horribly wrong. The pulse had fired. The vast array of quantum entanglement arrays had activated, sending an intense signal out into the cosmos, a message that could theoretically travel across vast stretches of space and time. It was meant to be a beacon, but instead, it had triggered something else, something far older, far more powerful. A single thought nagged at her, pulling her deeper into the conspiracy of her own mind. The pulse hadn't just reached out, it had opened something. It had unlocked a doorway into another realm, one that should have stayed closed forever. Days had passed since the event, and yet Dr. Hammond couldn't shake the feeling that time had begun to bend. It was like the planet itself had stopped. The silence was not just an absence of sound, it was an absence of movement, an absence of connection, a fundamental, intangible absence, as though the laws of reality themselves had been rewritten. We were never meant to contact this thing, Hammond muttered under her breath, her hands trembling as she sifted through the data once again. Every analysis came back the same, an unexplainable, vast distortion in space-time that couldn't be traced. The satellites that had once captured even the faintest glimmer of distant stars now saw nothing but black void. There was no signal returning from the pulse, no message, no trace. The screen in front of her flickered briefly, like a warning. Her heartbeat quickened, her eyes darted back to the readings. A distortion, but not just any distortion. This one was different. The quantum signal, once strong and clear, had splintered. It had fragmented into something more elusive. The data was too complex to parse in real time, too erratic. Something out there was watching. The briefing. Dr. Hammond wasn't alone in this quiet, ever-shifting nightmare. A small team of researchers had been working alongside her at the underground facility, located miles beneath the surface of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Among them was her lead engineer, Julian Markov, a grizzled veteran of space technology who had spent years developing advanced quantum devices. He had been the first to notice the irregularities in the pulse's performance, the strange anomalies that were starting to form just after the signal had been sent. Something was wrong, yet terribly wrong. "Elisa," Julian said, his deep, gravelly voice cutting through the stillness. He had been standing at the door for a few moments before she even noticed. His face was pale, ashen. "You need to see this." Without waiting for a response, Julian walked to the central console and tapped a few commands on the screen. A set of new data points appeared, distorted waveforms, inconsistent readings. It was unlike anything they had seen before. "Something's happening, and I don't think it's just the pulse itself," Julian continued, his voice trembling. "The energy readings a broken bar, they're increasing, more than they should. We've triggered something far beyond our control." Dr. Hammond's throat tightened. She stepped forward and stared at the data. The waveforms. They were sharp and unpredictable, almost sentient. The anomalies were not just quantum fluctuations, but something alive. "Are you telling me it's the entity?" Hammond asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian nodded grimly. "It has to be. I can't think of any other explanation. Whatever it is, it's sending a response back to us." The pulse was only the beginning. Dr. Hammond didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. A response? She had feared that the pulse had opened a doorway to something alien, something too old to comprehend, but she hadn't dared to believe it was real. That's why they had been so careful, so meticulous. But now, she was staring at the undeniable truth that their experiment had invited something far beyond the cosmos. "We need to report this," Hammond said, her hands shaking as she prepared to send a message to the surface. But before she could act, a new alert flashed across her screen. This time, it wasn't just a set of erratic readings, it was a direct communication. The signal was clear, but its message, unfathomable. The letters on the screen blurred into jagged, incomprehensible symbols. As Hammond watched, the symbols twisted and morphed, rearranging themselves before her very eyes, as if mocking her inability to understand them. Her heart raced in her chest. Was this an alien language, or was it something else entirely? She reached for the comms array, her fingers trembling. "Julian," she whispered, but her voice was hollow. "Get the others, we need to prepare for the worst." Within minutes, the rest of the team arrived in the control room, each of them staring at the screen in disbelief. Their faces reflected the same terror that had gripped Hammond's heart for the past few hours. They were witnessing something they were never supposed to see. Dr. Hammond scanned the room, meeting each of their eyes. There was no denying it anymore. The silence wasn't just a technological anomaly. It was a warning. "This is not just about us," Hammond said, her voice steady despite the chaos bubbling inside. "We've reached out to something far older than humanity. This isn't just a message, it's a declaration. The entity is aware of us now. It has noticed us." Julian stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the ever-shifting symbols on the screen. "What does it want?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Hammond replied. "Whatever this entity is, it doesn't seem pleased that we've opened this door. We've disturbed something ancient, and I fear a broken bar. It's coming for us." The galaxy respawns. Meanwhile, far beyond Earth's atmosphere, a galaxy-wide ripple of concern was spreading. At the Galactic Council, representatives from the most powerful civilizations across the stars were already in motion. Each species had monitored Earth's development for centuries. They had watched as humanity pushed the boundaries of space exploration, advancing in technology at a rapid pace. Despite Earth's chaotic political history and aggressive growth, the galaxy had quietly placed its faith in Earth's potential. But this was different. "I've never seen anything like it," said General Carinth, a reptilian commander from the distant Zithra system. He was a being of cold calculation and military discipline, one who had spent years navigating the complex balance of galactic politics. But even he was rattled. "I've sent a report to every allied faction. This is more than just a technical failure. It's as if the entire solar system is being erased from the map." Councillor Ziller, the energy-based being from the Tlaura Nebula, flickered and hummed in a way that signaled confusion. "If Earth's signal is being blocked, then who is doing the blocking, and why?" Anxiety rippled through the assembled representatives. The idea of an unknown force, potentially hostile, interfering with Earth was unsettling. They had watched humanity grow, but had they really been ready for what they had unleashed? A communication that had awakened something ancient, something powerful. "What should we do?" asked Lammer, a large, telepathic species from the Epsilon Eridani system. "Earth may not survive this. We can't sit idly by," General Carinth replied, his voice sharp. "This may be a test, or worse, a prelude to something far more catastrophic. We need to investigate." The council members murmured in agreement, but there was fear behind their words. Fear of the unknown, fear of what Earth's silence might truly mean. As much as they had monitored humanity, the galaxy was not prepared for these, and no one was. And yet, they knew they had no choice. The discovery on Earth was no longer just a human issue, it was a galactic one. The echoes of silence back on Earth, the pulse had triggered something far worse than they could have imagined. The entity they had inadvertently contacted was not just a presencia, it was a consciousness, a cosmic being, existing on a scale beyond comprehension. It had no name, no form, but its influence was undeniable. And it was angry. As Dr. Hammond sat in the control room, watching the symbols pulse on the screen, She couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The galaxy was stirring, the entities of the stars taking notice of Earth's silence, and yet she still had no answers. The entity, or whatever it was, had demanded the silence, and Earth had no choice but to comply. But one thing was certain. The silence was only the beginning. The next chapter of this story would hold the key to humanity's survival or its destruction, and Dr. Hammond would soon find herself caught at the center of a cosmic struggle beyond anything she had ever imagined. This expanded chapter sets the stage for the next steps of the plot. Would you like to continue exploring the story? The message. Dr. Elisa Hammond stared at the screen, feeling a growing sense of dread coil in her stomach. The symbols, once shifting and unfathomable, had now begun to form a coherent pattern. They were still alien and no human language could ever begin to match their complexity, but they weren't completely meaningless anymore. The once chaotic array of symbols had slowly given way to an organized form, but that order only heightened Hammond's terror. It was a language, yes, but it wasn't like anything anyone had ever studied. The pulse had reached an intelligence, but not a civilization, as something far older, and far more enigmatic. Julian, Hammond whispered, her voice trembling as she pointed to the screen. Look, the symbols. They're changing. Julian Markov stepped closer, his broad, worn hands tightening into fists. He had worked on countless classified projects, but this was a different breed of chaos. What they had set in motion could have repercussions far beyond Earth's atmosphere. He could feel the air in the room grow thick with tension as the symbols began to take on form. They weren't just gibberish anymore, they were a direct form of communication. What do you think it wants? Julian asked, his voice a quiet rasp, almost as if speaking louder would provoke the entity into something more dangerous. I don't know. I'm not sure it's even want in the way we understand it, Hammond replied, her voice low with uncertainty. But the messages, they're becoming clearer. It's almost as though it's responding to us. Dr. Hammond's fingers hovered over the console. Her mind raced. If this entity was truly responding to the pulse they had created, if it was communicating with them in some form, it was an unprecedented moment in human history. But what did it mean? Was this a warning, a declaration of war, or something even more incomprehensible? The symbols on the screen finally began to break into readable characters, their structure forming coherent patterns that reminded Hammond of something organic. Not a language, but something more akin to a blueprint, a map, a coordinate system. And then came a message, one that sent shivers down her spine as the digital display flickered into focus. Return the offering or face the consequence. The words, stark in their simplicity, rang out in the stillness of the underground lab. It was a warning, and it was unmistakable. Hammond's heart pounded in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't expected this. It wasn't just an acknowledgement of their existence. The entity had noticed them, but not in a way that was sympathetic. This was a demand. It wasn't just reaching out, it was demanding something, something that they had no way of understanding. Hammond couldn't look away from the screen. Her mind spun, running through every possibility she could think of. Who was it that they had contacted? How could they even begin to interpret the message? And more importantly, what was the offering? Was it a literal object, or was it a metaphor? We have to contact the others, Julian finally said, his voice steady now, though his face had gone pale. We can't do this alone. This thing or whatever it is, it wants something, and I'm afraid that whatever we do next could end everything. We have to know what it means, and we need help. Dr. Hammond swallowed hard. She knew the truth. I've been trying to reach the surface. The communications systems are still down. Every time I attempt to send a signal, I get nothing. It's as if something is blocking us. Julian cursed under his breath, frustration creeping into his voice. So we're stuck down here, alone with a message we can't fully understand, and no way to warn anyone else? Hammond nodded, the weight of it pressed down on her chest like 1,000 tons. They were in a race against time, and she wasn't sure how much time they had left. Then, as if mocking their helplessness, the screen blinked again. Another set of symbols appeared, the same ominous, alien script, but this time, there was a distinct difference. The symbols began to rearrange themselves, forming letters, human letters, as though the entity had adapted to Earth's language, a further escalation in its response. The offering is not negotiable. The fear spreads. The silence that had engulfed Earth was not only literal, it had taken hold of the entire planet, leaving everyone to wonder what had caused it. People continued to wait, confused and on edge. But while ordinary citizens waited for some kind of resolution, global leaders began to formulate their responses. On the surface, the world was in chaos. Governments scrambled to piece together what was happening, trying to restore communication with Earth's space programs and satellites. Yet all attempts to break through the cosmic barrier, as some had begun to call it, had failed. Every probe sent into space to collect data on Earth returned blank and nothing. It was as though Earth had become a dark, uninhabited void. In this vacuum, rumors had begun to spread. Some of the more radical theories suggested that humanity's contact with an alien race had triggered an irreversible chain of events, that their curiosity had attracted the attention of something dangerous. Others believed that Earth had been severed from the universe as a result of some cosmic punishment, a retribution for humanity's arrogance in seeking out the unknown. There was no doubt that Earth had become the center of the galaxy's attention, but what would happen when the truth finally emerged? When the reason for the silence and the nature of the entity became clear, the entity's nature back in the underground lab, Hammond and her team were no closer to understanding the message. The pulse they had sent out to the stars had become a call to something else, something ancient. The pulse hadn't just reached an alien civilization, it had reached a cosmic force, one that had existed long before humanity ever came into being. Hammond had begun to wonder whether this entity even considered humanity worth acknowledging at all. The symbols on the screen had stopped shifting now, they had settled into something resembling a warning. Yet Hammond could sense that this was just the beginning of something much larger, something terrifying. The entity had demanded the offering, but what could they offer that could appease it? The thought hung heavily in her mind, weighing on her conscience. "I don't know what we're supposed to do," Julian said softly, his voice full of uncertainty. "What can we offer?" Hammond shook her head. "I don't know. We've made contact, and now there's a price to pay. But what kind of offering could we possibly make to something like this?" Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden burst of static from the communications panel. She quickly turned, her heart racing, and watched as a new transmission began to form. At first, it was just white noise, but slowly, something started to emerge from the static. A distorted image flickered, then focused. It was a video feed, a transmission. On the other end, a face appeared, a face she didn't recognize. It was humanoid, but not quite human. The features were soft, angular, and smooth, like they belonged to a species far more advanced than humanity. The eyes, though, were what caught Hammond's attention. They were not merely eyes, they were vast, filled with stars and swirling galaxies, as though the being's entire existence was an embodiment of the universe itself. The being on the screen spoke, but Hammond couldn't understand the words. The sound was garbled, alien. However, there was a sense of urgency, a grave tone in its voice. She pressed a few commands, and the system tried to translate the language, but the meaning was lost in the translation. Suddenly, the message stopped. The figure on the screen vanished, leaving only a cryptic symbol, a pattern that seemed to resonate with the pulse itself. A ripple of distortion, and then the screen went black. And new reality with the final transmission severed. Hammond and her team exchanged uncertain looks. The transmission had been a confirmation. It wasn't just a warning. The entity knew of Earth's existence and had now taken steps to communicate, but the content of the message had left them with more questions than answers. Julian exhaled slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if it isn't just us that's at risk? What if the whole galaxy is in danger?" Hammond turned to him, her expression hardening. "I'm afraid it's worse than that. We've set something in motion, a force that's bigger than anything we could have imagined. The entity's warning wasn't just for us, it's for the entire universe." The room felt even colder now. Time seemed to slow, and Hammond realized that the moment of truth had arrived. The galaxy had been thrust into a new reality, a one where Earth was no longer a mere observer, but a catalyst. A new power had emerged, and with it, a new kind of reckoning. The silence was not just about Earth anymore, it was a cosmic event, and they had only just begun to realize the enormity of the forces they had awakened.